Hi guys, I haven't really done one of these YouTube broadcasts for a long time, but I just wanted to speak about the rising costs of flights to the Philippines and the impact this will undoubtedly have on the mental health of our Filipino workers or OFWs who are here in the UK. But I also fully expect this will have the same impact on OFWs around the world. Just recently, about a week ago, I was contacted by one of our kababayan in the UK who wanted to go to the Philippines for the burial of his father back home. This was probably about the second week of July, where he contacted me and asked me if it was possible to get a cheaper flight. I then randomly checked the dates from the 25th of July until the 2nd of August. So this was just a few days before. So basically, this was like an emergency visit. And I looked on all the various websites, lastminute.com, Expedia, etc. And I was struggling to find an available flight, and I saw a quote for £5,000 for an economy ticket with Emirates, and this is basically for a week's visit. And the cheapest other flight I could find was £3,500, which is absolutely extortionate. I understand why. It's down to the rising costs of flight. It's down to the limited availability of passengers at Heathrow and other airports. And there are many other issues as well, why there is a fuel surcharge. And there are so many other issues as well, why the flights are more expensive. I understand that. But at the same time, personally, I've been back home to the Philippines around about 55 times over 3 decades. And when I used to travel home to the Philippines, it used to maybe be £400 a ticket, maybe 500, anywhere up to 750 or £800. I don't think in my history I've ever paid more than £800 for a flight to the Philippines. And now when I'm checking in low season in maybe September or October, I'm seeing fares for about £850 minimum. When I'm checking with about a month's notice from now, I'm seeing flights for nearly £2,000. This is having a real impact on Filipinos around the world. When I was younger, I used to bring my family back home to the Philippines. And if we would go to the Philippines as a family, the most we would spend on flights for all of us is about £2,500. When I went with my mum, when I went with my children, I think it was £2,500 for all of us to go back home. I have to say, if you go back home now as a family, you are talking about £9,000 or £8,000 for your flights. And then on that, you're talking about spending money, everything else. You need about £10,000 to go back home to the Philippines. You almost need a bank loan. And this is having really an adverse effect. What it's meaning is we have Filipino nurses, maybe they're going back home. They've just maybe come to the UK. Maybe they're going back home to the Philippines to visit their parents. And maybe they're having to spend maybe £2,000, £3,000 in order to do that. And the impact is this, it's going to affect their mental health. I'm really worried about this situation. You leave the Philippines to become a nurse, you travel to the UK, and maybe you have to settle down here, pay your rent, pay your bills, and make a life here. And going back home to the Philippines would actually take quite a significant chunk of your income to the tune of thousands of pounds. And this is going to mean undoubtedly for these nurses, maybe for families growing up in the UK with maybe children, maybe Pinoy or half Pinoy, they can't go home so often. Back in the day, my children have had about 8 or 9 visits to the Philippines. But I have to say, unless you earn a significant income, life in the UK is pretty tough. By the time you pay your mortgage or maybe you rent and then you pay gas, you pay electric, you pay all the other bills, you're hardly left with anything in your pocket at all. And then to go back home to the Philippines is a massive expense. And I do think this will have an adverse impact on the mental health of our kababayan here in the UK. Now, since I posted about this the other day, I've been receiving a number of messages from Filipinos, not only in the UK, but many in America, in the Middle East, talking about fares of maybe $2,000 upwards. So going home is not so easy at the moment. And undoubtedly, this will have an effect on the mental health of our kababayan. Here's the issue. If you're a Filipino nurse and you are being employed, say, in America or maybe in the Middle East, maybe Dubai, Saudi, whatsoever, the employers, they do give assistance towards airfares. If you go to the Middle East as a nurse, you're given some kind of contract, and often these include a flight back home to your home country, maybe once a year or twice a year. I heard about a Filipino nurse, a long-term friend of mine. She worked in Saudi Arabia, and she was given tickets back home to the Philippines. Now, the Middle Eastern airlines, a lot of them are state-owned. A lot of them have a lot of money. Money isn't really an object, although there are rising flight costs, and I understand that. But the fact is, the world should be grateful for its Filipino workers. And I do believe there is an argument for the nation or the employer to maybe support Filipinos to go back home to the Philippines. Maybe if there was some kind of emergency fund, maybe if a nurse, maybe her parents are sick, maybe she needs to go home to a funeral or something like that, maybe there should be some kind of fund that he or she could tap into to help towards the cost of going back home to the Philippines. Because I don't think anybody can afford fares of £2,000 or £3,000 at short notice. And I really do worry about this. But I also worry about our young people as well, who maybe haven't seen their families back home for a long time. They're not connected with their culture in the Philippines. And I do believe there's really an impact on the mental health of families, on the mental health of our young people right now, when basically they can't see their families in the Philippines for year on end. It's really an issue. I don't really know what could solve this or if the situation would improve. But certainly these rising flight costs to the Philippines is certainly having a massive impact. It's certainly a massive issue. If you go back home to the Philippines, some people are talking about a quarter of their yearly salary just for one trip. And it's just become almost impossible. A lot of Pinoys are telling me instead of going home to the Philippines, what they're doing is they're just sending the equivalent money to their families, and they're accepting the fact that they can no longer go home. What happens if you've got a relative who maybe gets sick back home and you want to visit them maybe before they get really sick, maybe before they pass away? You need a bank loan to visit your own country. And this is really, really an issue. And I do believe this is having an effect on the mental health of many of our kababayan. It's kind of leading to depression. It's causing financial concern, financial worries. And I do think maybe the UK, maybe America, they need to introduce some kind of emergency fund. So on the one hand, you're employing nurses from the Philippines, and on the one hand, these nurses, then they cannot go home to see their loved ones. And this is undoubtedly going to have an effect on their mental health. So I do wonder, just like the Middle East, if you who employ maybe nurses, maybe workers, and they allow you to go back home, maybe a ticket, maybe once a year, twice a year, I do believe this is something that should be discussed. And I do hope maybe the Philippine government maybe could set up a task force to maybe speak to the airlines and to deal with the situation. I'm wondering if the Department of Foreign Affairs can look into this, because I do think it's having an impact on Filipino families. And I do believe this is a serious issue. Just to recap, I tried to get a flight for a friend for a economy fare traveling in July. And this ticket was £5,000, which is absolutely ridiculous. So if he'd gone with his family, you're talking about the yearly salary wiped out on one trip. This is really, really a worry, and I do hope this can be addressed. I do hope maybe there's something can be done, maybe reducing the fuel subsidy, maybe speaking to some of the airlines. You know, many of our kababayan have been really loyal to the likes of Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways. For years upon years, they've been traveling home. And now the fares are into the thousands of pounds. And it means that Filipinos, maybe who've really been a staunch supporter of the Middle Eastern airlines, you know, you look at how many OFWs are employed in the Middle East, maybe more than 2 million. And you look at the times they've been traveling back home to the Philippines, say from the Middle East, that's been filling planes. So they've been supporting those airlines in their growth. And on the one hand, now they're actually coming out with these fares of thousands of pounds. And I really do think this is a real worry. And I'm calling on the airline industry to maybe introduce a special booking class, you know, for emergency travel. For example, if you have a relative back home in the Philippines, maybe they're very sick, maybe they've been diagnosed with cancer, maybe there's a way you could approach the airline and maybe explain the circumstances. And maybe there should be a certain amount of fares that should be reserved, maybe not for tourism purposes, but maybe for emergencies. Maybe this is something that can really be considered, because I think this is a real issue. And I really do think this impacts on the mental health of our kababayan around the world. And I really do hope this can be considered. Maraming salamat po for watching this video. As I said, I rarely do these YouTube lives, but I really wanted to discuss this issue, and I'm hoping something can be done about it. Thanks, guys.